For decades, Cuba has built a system where, in exchange for personal liberties, the state controls the grid, the fuel, and the flow of daily life. That kind of model only holds if the infrastructure keeps working. Right now, it isn't. The national power grid has collapsed multiple times in a matter of weeks, leaving entire regions without electricity, disrupting food supply chains, and shutting down basic services. This is what it looks like when a centralized system starts failing from the inside. That failure does not stay abstract. It moves straight into places like hospitals. Doctors are dealing with repeated outages, limited generator capacity, and interrupted care. In a hot, humid climate, losing power brings real medical consequences. Equipment fails, conditions worsen, and routine treatment gets thrown off schedule. The system that once marketed its health care now has to operate around an unstable grid. Hassan Piker, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's daughter, members of Code Pink, and Irish rap group Kneecap were part of a CCP-funded pro-regime delegation that arrived in Cuba as the island was sinking into rolling blackouts. While ordinary Cubans were dealing with a collapsing grid, that visiting crowd was housed in luxury hotels with power and moved through a staged version of the country. Oh, but don't worry. Hassan Piker assured us through his electrically powered traveling podcast setup in his 5-star suite, the Cuban people are just fine without electricity. They don't need it.
It's remarkable. The people's resilience is remarkable. There's like rolling blackouts that take place throughout the day, every day, all around the country, right? 11 million people. But today is a beautiful day out here. It's like 75 degrees, sunny. People are partying. People are partying in the streets. I don't know if it's like an island mindset. I don't know if that has something to do with it. I'm sure that has something to do with it, but like, they're just chilling.
Cuba's government continues to blame us. It blames U.S. sanctions and energy restrictions for the shortages. And this is also unfolding as the Trump administration is signaling a harder line on the regime's future. Cuban officials are warning of possible military escalation and preparing for that scenario, even as diplomatic channels remain open. Our next guest is retired Army intelligence officer, West Point professor and commentator, Emilio T. González. He joins us now. Emilio, thank you so much. What amazing hypocrisy we're watching from Code Pink, Hassan Piker out there, I guess, praising the resilience of the Cuban people for surviving no electricity.
Well, it's not only hypocrisy, it's disgusting because you have all of these folks visiting Cuba as if it was some sort of a zoo. They're in their air-conditioned buses, they're being driven through neighborhoods and they're waving at the natives. And they get out and they throw candy at the children so that they'll pose in photos. I mean, this is just disgusting. And the issue with the energy blackout, if I could, this didn't happen yesterday. Donald Trump didn't cause an energy blackout. It's because the Cuban government has not modernized its energy systems in the last 65 years. And that's what we're seeing. Interestingly, there's no electricity for anybody, but there's plenty of electricity for the police, for the military, and for the 5-star hotels housing all of their international guests. So this is just it's appalling. It really is. It's beyond disgusting.
I'm seeing reports. I don't know. They're unverified, but reports that hospitals are suffering and people who have been on ventilators were unable to actually rely on any kind of generators at the hospitals. And so there were reports that everyone on a ventilator in Cuba has passed away because of the lack of consistency in electricity. And that just seems amazingly
I read
tragic,
that report.
considering what these people were still able to do in their hotels.
Sure. Listen, I read that report. If it's true, it is tragic. It's sad. But what's even sadder is that whatever electricity Cuba can generate, they're not dedicating it to the people. They're not dedicating it to the hospitals, to the elderly. They're dedicating it to the army and to the police to make sure that in all this darkness, folks don't get out of control. Why is it that 650 foreigners can stay at a 5-star hotel, eating lobster, with internet access, with running water, with electricity? That's fine. But, a block away, people are in total darkness. The government in Cuba controls everything, and that includes electricity. If they don't want you to get it, you're not going to get it.
They've had what is reported to be 3 very large-scale grid failures in 1 month. Now, it's no coincidence that this is on the tail end of Venezuela falling under the regime change that's happening down there. But the fact that the grid has failed so many times in just the last few months, that has to put the remaining government forces in dire straits. I mean, how much longer are they going to hold on?
Absolutely. And that when they say that there's a lack of energy, that we have this energy blockade, even if all that energy had gotten through, the grid still would have failed because it hasn't been maintained. It's old Soviet era equipment. It hasn't been maintained. By the way, last year they had a huge fire at one of their big oil terminals. So you have massive safety issues there. But more important, these are political issues. The Cuban government prioritizes. Okay, we're in an energy crunch. Who gets energy? Okay, number one, the army. Number two, the police. Number three, all of the fellow travelers that we've invited in.
Reportedly, Mexico is also shutting down its shipments of oil to Cuba. This, I think, it looks like it indicates that the leverage points that China has on neighbors as it relates to Cuba seem to be tightening a little bit. And, it's hard to discuss Cuba without discussing Venezuela. Venezuela is now out of the picture. It's hard to discuss Cuba now without also talking about China and where it stands in its support and its either direct support or indirect support. Where do you think we stand there?
I don't think China is going to get involved here. China's equities are not in keeping Cuba alive. It's too far away. Mexico used to send oil to Cuba, and because the U.S. administration pressured them, they stopped sending oil, but they're sending food and they're sending rice and beans. But interestingly, all that food is ending up in the military stores. Brazil just sent 20,000 tons of rice. Where is that rice? In military-run stores that generate dollars for the ruling class. So this is like a big do loop. You bring in all sorts of humanitarian aid that isn't humanitarian aid. You sell it either on the open market or the black market, and then whatever monies you recoup, you use that to keep the army and the police happy.
Cuban officials are warning now about possible military escalation as our policies are tightening around all of these affairs. Do you think there is a risk of the military rising up against the regime?
Well, the regime has a very tight control on the military. I'll tell you what my biggest fear is, that every time for the last 67 years that Cuba has been in crisis, they unleash a migration crisis. And they haven't talked about it now, but when things get really bad, the Cuban government puts its hands up and says, okay, if you want to leave, you can leave. And all those boats head towards the U.S., and lo and behold, whatever the U.S. government is around, they will then sit and have a conversation with the Cubans. It happened with Bill Clinton and so forth. So that's something that fears me, that is fearful to me, because it will change the conversation. It'll change the dynamic. The Cuban military right now is very loyal to the establishment. They're one of the few people that eat regularly.
What about the Cuban community, the diaspora here in the United States, a very hefty, politically involved community, and lots of hardliners who are looking at the situation right now with a blend of hope, but at the same time, deep skepticism that the administration seems to be talking to members of the top political class. Lots of warnings from the Cuban community saying, hey, you can't believe a single thing that comes out of this regime. We're seeing similar trends inside the diaspora when it comes to Iran. Where does the Cuban community stand right now as it's assessing who's in power and who's set to take over?
You said it perfectly, and that is, I'll give you an example. Venezuela, we arrested Maduro, but the entire Maduro establishment is still there. And the big fear among the Cuban community is that the same people that are there now, they might very well, the Communist Party could have a Congress tomorrow and fire their current president. And then the last thing we need is people in Washington to be pinning a medal on each other and saying, hey, we won. No, these folks are pros at dealing with Americans. Cubans have dealt with 11 different presidents since Fidel Castro came to power. They know where the pressure points are. They know how to deal with the United States. And that's where I think the Cuban community is really fairly united in that, listen, we know what dictatorship is and we know what dictatorship isn't. And for us to move forward on this, for us to be able to help and rebuild the country, we need to see some real palpable changes there, not just getting rid of one person or another, and then the whole Castro clan continues to function, making millions, and the 95% of the people in Cuba continue to starve to death.
What an amazing moment in history to see if this actually resolves in a way that results in freedom for Cuba. In the meantime, we'll be watching. Emilio T. González, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up, President Trump says negotiations are underway and stops strikes. Iran says there are no talks at all. Which version do we believe? Ali Reza Jafarzadeh weighs in. We'll be right back.